And we're live. I'll start with a quick intro em português and then we'll move on. Hoje nós temos o enorme prazer de receber o Amit Pradhan, que é o presidente da Silicon Valley Blockchain Society. E já temos aqui um convidado muito ilustre que já falou em Davos, é ouvido nos mais seletos círculos de investimento e desenvolvimento da tecnologia blockchain. É um grande privilégio ter ele aqui. Vamos seguir em inglês, como acontece com os nossos convidados internacionais. It's a true pleasure having you here with us, Amit. I'm not only a member, but a fan of the work you do at SBBS, and I love the motto. I love how diverse the meetings are. And please, we usually let our guests introduce themselves. So if you could share a little bit of your background and what led to SBBS, that would be amazing. Thanks for being here with us.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much, Gabriel. I have been in the world of technology for longer than I would like to admit, and so my work has involved deep technology largely. I have been in the world of AI for 16 years now, and we focused on the area of responsible AI. That transitioned, part of the responsible AI journey transitioned into the idea that as we move to a more privacy-focused AI and an AI that be far more decentralized in the way its data model works, it was a natural fit into the world of blockchain. So my entry into the world of blockchain was actually more technology oriented than it was crypto oriented, right? I didn't look at it from a, wow, let's buy in early because this is going to be, those are nice byproducts of being involved in this space. My approach has always been that we're very fortunate, few of us. We operate in the technology capitals of the world. We have access to early technology, and we have access to the rewards that come from it, right? Which a lot of people around the world tend not to. And it's very important in those positions of privilege that we have not earned, but we have been fortunate to be dropped into, that we apply that privilege in a very responsible way. And for me, that journey was about how do we use technology to fundamentally make human lives better? And that is the measurement that I always take with any company, founders, initiatives that I either invest in, I influence, or I create by myself. And that has been a operating philosophy that I've used for the past 5 years of this 25-year journey. And I can say this, it not only, I think, made me a better investor and a better entrepreneur, I think it made me a much happier human for who I am by myself. And I look around and I think we're constantly looking at these technology bubbles that get created that have incredible economic upside for those who take the initial risk and are creative, and they deserve it, and it's wonderful. But it feels like the motivators tend to be purely financial, and none more so than in the world of crypto. And so the creation of Silicon Valley Blockchain Society was, on one hand, to bring responsible capital from a long-term perspective to a space that was otherwise built on short-term benefits. You go in early, you trade out quickly, you've made money, great, right? No one faults you for it. But as an industry, as an ecosystem, not only do you want it to be sustainable and long-term, you want it to solve for the bigger problems. You want it to solve for the problems that matter, and not for, oh gosh, I'm going to make this really cool product and then Facebook will buy years later, I've got a lot of money. I don't fault people for that. But what a waste of incredible talent when you can't solve for these big problems. And so in the realm of blockchain, we believed that we wanted to make sure that there was a responsible voice, a long-term voice, and a voice that was not about us. Who cares about Amit? Who cares about David? Who cares about the other people involved. It's about the movement. It's about what we're trying to create. It's about the community. It's about the network. And that was the basis of Silicon Valley Blockchain Society.
That is amazing. It's...
Gabriel, did I lose you? You seem to be frozen.
Hello? Looks like we're having technical problems. Estamos tendo problemas técnicos. Vamos ver se o Amit consegue se reconectar. Ele conseguiu, que é ótimo, porque senão eu ia ter que fazer algum sapateado aqui. We're back!
I'm not sure.
I was considering doing some tap dance while you were away, but I'm glad it was quickly solved for myself and the viewers.
Okay, wonderful. I don't know where I lost you, so you froze at one point.
Well, we could hear everything you said about SVBS and how you want to use technology for the good in the world, to fund and to share the benefits. And the first thing I noticed it's how you are aware of your position of privilege. And that links directly to the economic crisis of 2008 and to the current COVID crisis that we're in. And there are some behavioral economic studies that show that usually people in a position of privilege, they not only they don't acknowledge that as much, but they start thinking that they are better than everyone else. And there's this monopoly study that's often called, I think it's UC Irvine that conducted it or something. So my question is, how does that message resonate in the environment of Silicon Valley? And can people be a little skeptical when they think about investors aiming for the good of the world, or is it a little different than what one would normally expect?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think Silicon Valley has historically been focused on innovation and the outsized return that the innovation brings. And oftentimes what happens is you become a victim of your own success. You become a prisoner of your template, and then you just want that template to keep working constantly. And I'll give you a quick example. The way that venture capital is structured, these funds have a limited time span. They have to return a certain amount of capital in that time span. And what tends to happen is, as these funds get to year 4 of a 7-year life or a 5-year life, they now have to quickly make sure that their portfolio starts to return the money they can return. So they don't care so much about is this solving problems that the world faces? Is this solving problems society faces at large? Is this solving real problems? It's just about what can I build that Facebook will buy, what can I build that Amazon will buy or Google would buy. And so you get caught up in this cycle of then just investing in your echo chamber. We found more and more that there are a lot of great investors. Investors, obviously, as you know, in our network, in SVBS, we're very careful about who we bring in and who we work with. They must resonate with these philosophies.
Meu Deus. Poxa, que pena, na hora que ele estava indo pro tópico. A entrevista está indo e voltando. Vamos ver se ele consegue entrar de novo, senão eu vou ter que fazer o que eu prometi, que era dançar sapateado aqui. Foram salvos.
Yeah, it's a unreliable connection. It keeps saying it's throwing me out. And so
But
we
it's
all,
good to know that that happens in Silicon Valley as well. It's not only in Brazil.
well, I tell you what, I'm currently sitting in Switzerland. I got here a few days ago, so we can either blame Swiss infrastructure, which is hard to do because it's Switzerland, um, but we're starting to see, I think I dropped off when I was talking about Silicon Valley investors, we're starting to see a change happen. We're starting to see investors who speak the kind of language that we do, who want to invest in, solutions for the environment, who want to solve solutions for economic inequality and injustice, who want to invest in solutions for, health, but not health of just the wealthy, but health of the world. And we're starting to see innovation in the way that venture funds are structured. We're a great example of that ourselves because we're constantly looking at ways to create liquidity into our core model, which means we're not tied by time of investment, which means we can look at companies that are solving for the bigger problems, because guess what? The bigger the problem you solve for, on one hand, the bigger the opportunity. So financially, it's fantastic, but it means longer the time for it to come to fruition. It takes a long time to build. It takes a long time to test. It has to start, gaining traction. And if you have the patience and if you have the financial instruments that allow for that to happen, then everyone can get involved. And what I really love about this story of Silicon Valley is that Silicon Valley came from entrepreneurs with nothing but courage and dreams and massive appetite for risk. Um, and I think in the end, somewhere along the way, the success got so significant that money became the main driver. And one of the great things that's happened, not just with Silicon Valley, but I'm sure you will reflect on this in your wonderful country, which I haven't been to yet, by the way. I cannot wait to visit. But
we're going to solve that in the future, definitely.
I can't wait. I can't wait. And the big change that is happening is that Buckminster Fuller had a beautiful saying: "We are called to be the architects of the future, not its victims." And you think about that, it's calling all of us. We can't just keep sitting there and saying, you know what, I blame the government, I blame the corporations, I blame the man. This is our opportunity for us to all participate. And we're starting to see that. We're starting to see citizens get involved and say, I can be part of the solution. I don't have to just complain about the problem. And the reason I mention that is permeating up even to the hallowed halls of Silicon Valley, and investors are waking up and saying, wow, this is a different time, this is a different movement, and we have to start thinking about the greater good. And I'll be the first one to admit that it's still a minority of Silicon Valley investors, but the ones who are phenomenal people. I have nothing but mad respect for them, and we work together, and we're trying to do this more and more and at scale.
And with that view, why the option for blockchain? What are the characteristics of blockchain that make up for a possible better future for society?
Yeah, the blockchain, like any other technology, any other inflection point in from a technology perspective, is very different compared to, let's say, something significant like the internet. Then we had mobility, then we had AI. For the most part, the internet, as we're seeing today with the American election, can be used for evil in a very easy way. AI, what a wonderfully powerful concept, tool, platform, and yet AI can be used in so many negative ways. For the most part, blockchain is quite different, right? I mean, there's not a lot of evil, negative ways to use the blockchain. It's not the most efficient way for you to be evil, right? If you want to be evil, there's better tools, and we can talk about a 101 on how to be evil. So the blockchain has this incredible ability to bring, the democratization of wealth and value and access. Because if you think about it, just to take 30 seconds on this, what the printing press did when Gutenberg invented the printing press is it took knowledge that was limited only to royalty, kings, and princes and princesses, and made it available to the average person. So what it did was it democratized knowledge. What the internet did was it took lots of this information that was there in silos, and it democratized access to that information, right? And what crypto and blockchain have done is, for the first time, they've democratized the access to currency, to wealth, right? And if you think of that philosophical underpinning, people often get caught up into Bitcoin and its price, or take your pick of top 10 currencies or top 10 DeFi projects and their price. Sometimes we get caught up into the blockchain part of the technology, each person standing up and saying, my protocol is better than yours, I can do X amount of transactions per second, Y amount of transactions per second. And oftentimes that conversation tends to blanket this really important underlying philosophy of why decentralization, right? Why, therefore, the currency on top of decentralization. And if you stay true to the underlying philosophy, you can then unlock incredible opportunities, but you can also solve for incredible structural systemic challenges, which otherwise we're not able to do with technology.
So how, I have two questions on that line. First, how do you invest in something decentralized? And how do you measure good impact, if not for profit? I mean, money is also an easy way out. Profit's an easy way out. I mean, I was successful, was not. How do you measure the good of society that you're doing with that? And how do you capture the value if you build something decentralized?
Yeah, that's a great question, Gabriel. What I would say is, I'll break it into two parts. How do you recognize the value in a project, right? And from an investor's perspective, what that means is, how do you recognize the ability to return capital at multiples from that project, right? I oftentimes love to think about anything in a time span of 10 years rather than any sort of immediate return, not just financial, but return on what that project is trying to do. Now, I'll give you a simple example. If you talk about cryptocurrency, you talk about autonomous vehicles, right? You talk about space and space technology. As an investor sitting in an investor committee, looking at that investment that has gone through all other aspects of due diligence, oftentimes what you're looking at is regulatory challenges. Crypto is a great example of regulatory challenges. You're looking at, with autonomous cars, you're looking at the safety challenges. You're looking at the cultural challenges. When it comes to space, you're like, well, too expensive right now. We don't know what we don't know. There's too many unknowns. It's uncertain. But then ask yourself the question, don't worry about 2 years. Don't worry about 5 years. Let's only start talking at 10 years. 10 years from now, do you worry about, will there be a regulatory framework for crypto? Of course there will be, right? You may not like it, but there will be one. 10 years from now, 25 years from now, 50 years from now, would you ever argue that we are all going to be transported around in non-gasoline engine cars without drivers? No question. We not only on the road, it's going to be in the air. Nobody in their right mind would say, oh yeah, 50 years from now, of course this is possible. Well, if that's the case, then you already know it's possible. Now it's just a matter of you trying to figure out what you can do to help as an investor to make this happen. The question of can this happen is not there anymore. And so once you start applying a mindset like that, I think it changes the way you perceive investments. And it also changes the way you perceive return, right? So I would say this, and this is a blanket statement based on the work I do in the world of impact investing, um, which is largely about looking at a more holistic 360 view of returns, not just financial, right? And I always make the argument that it's not instead of financial returns, it is more sustainable financial returns, right? Because if you invest in things that harm the planet or harm society or are short term in nature, yes, you might get return in the short term, but it's not a company that can sustain itself in longer term. And if that's the case, what kind of investor are you if you're trying to create 10, 20, 30, 50-year value, right? And so history shows that those entrepreneurs, backed by those investors who are willing to solve for those big challenges that don't always have the obvious 5, 10, 15, 20x return in 3 years or 5 years, will actually see much larger financial returns. Because guess what? Products and services that create a positive impact on humans have a better adoption and retention rate with those humans, right? People who see a company in a positive way will forgive the company a lot of mistakes. Whereas a company that's perceived as being merely extractive and not doing good by the people, by society, by the environment, people might join them quickly because the product is attractive. But the first time something goes wrong, they will jump and move to the next product that comes with a better philosophy. So as an investor, I take this wider view, and it is not one in absence of financial return. It is actually one that says true financial return will be amplified when it actually is more holistic and complete in the way that it provides return to society at large, not just financial.
One thing that's connected to that and that's recurring in SBBS meetings, in my opinion, is that exactly what you said, the long-term view and how it benefits those that take that road. But also there's a sense of urgency. There's a sense of we need to act immediately. And well, the California fires, the Brazil fires, climate change is coming, and labor displacement due to automation and AI, all that requiring our generation to reshape fundamental economic values and relations. And a feeling I get is that you are very much aware of the need for that to, by the way, you do have a great piece on Medium about precisely that. We need to reshape society, and we need to do it now. So how do you combine those discourses, the urgent and the long term? And are you seeing that urgency being replicated in more traditional spheres, according to your experience?
Yeah, so I think having a long-term view and getting to it quickly are not in conflict of each other, right? So it's clear what our urgency is for all those who sat around and said climate change is not real, or it's not at our doorstep, or we don't have to do anything about it, have had their homes burned, right? And they've had to wake up and face this awful reality. And as someone who, feels such sorrow at the people who are fighting this beautiful movement to creating a better society, creating a better planet, it's awful to see them hurt, right? We don't want to see anyone hurt. And so the urgency is becoming clearer to everyone. I think what it does sometimes is, you've seen this in history, the best, and you mentioned this in your, when we started talking, the depression of 2008, the COVID crisis of now, some of the best innovation has come during times of crisis, right? Look at the best Silicon Valley companies. They've been built post the dot-com crash, post 2008. We're going to see the next generation of companies come out post, COVID-19, right? Investors are starting to wake up to the urgency of the crisis, but they're also waking up to the opportunity that the crisis brings forth. So let's take an example. What COVID-19 has shown us is that the future of wealth is so deeply tied to the future of health. We can't just think about wealth without thinking about health. And so as we start thinking about health and we think about just infectious disease, let's take Corona as a wider, COVID-19 is one part of it, and we'll have different strains of COVID-19, but Corona as a wider picture, and then SARS even wider. The opportunity, not just in the medical field of vaccines or antiviral drugs or ventilators and PPE, the equipment, but just in terms of if you're a blockchain company or you're an AI company, the opportunity to solve for the supply chain challenges that we saw with production of ventilators or coordinating supplies and being able to send them around. The challenges we've seen with the communication around COVID-19. For many in our generation and the generation after ours, they're looking around and wondering how has it happened that there can be such diverse views about the same disease, about how to tackle it, about how to solve for it. And there's opportunities to start fixing for that, right? And so I think that, at the end of the day, we have an incredible opportunity to look at the urgency that these crises bring us. But I still maintain that if we try and solve them with, I only care about my return tomorrow, then we'll be solving it with band-aids rather than fundamental systemic change, which makes for a better society, makes for a better planet, and definitely makes for better returns. We can have two conflicting thoughts in our mind at the same time. It's perfectly okay to be like that, right?
Definitely. So usually, when you think about the role, not usually, but in the political discourse, the state is usually aligned sometimes with the long-term goals for society. And in blockchain space, the state is oftentimes antagonized as something that's out of date, and I mean we are living a crisis of democracy right now in many countries. So this is definitely an inflection point, either for a new kind of state or something beyond the state. What's your view on that? Do you think the state is an ally and is blockchain means to rebuilding the state and democracy? Or are we building a new kind of global society that goes beyond the nation state as we know it?
Yeah, lots to unpack there. And I would say again, two of the things I said earlier, one is we can have two conflicting thoughts at the same time and actually prosper because of them. And also, if the first part of your question, which is, if I understand right, it's the people versus the interest of the people versus the interest of central authority, right? Governments, sovereign states. And look, if we go back 5 years, Gabriel, and we said, what would be the state of people versus government, right? Would you have predicted China digital currency? Would you have predicted Estonia entirely on the blockchain? Would you have predicted Dubai having all of its citizen services entirely on the blockchain, right? The answer would have been no, unless you're more of a visionary than clearly I am. That answer would have been no. And that's why I say think 10 years, 15 years, 30 years. In 50 years from now, do you think there will be well-operating countries, whatever that might look like, sovereignty will change, that don't use identity on the blockchain or land and title on the blockchain or issue driver's licenses on the blockchain, and there would be electronic documents, right? I don't think anyone here your audience would say, oh no, it will never happen, right? The question is how long, how arduous, how challenging, and in what sequence will which governments get on board and be like Estonia, right? Or be in many ways like the United States, which, for all of its a light on the shining hill and center of innovation and progressive, we all know there's another part of America which is anything but that, right? And from a regulatory perspective, that's been true. Would you rather start a blockchain company in Switzerland or Silicon Valley? You know the answer. It's a shocking answer, because who would not start a tech company in Silicon Valley? Are you crazy? Well, guess what? You're better off doing it in Switzerland under the regulatory framework that Switzerland offers than in the United States. And so we will see governments do like Estonia. We will see governments do like China. Look, China is, let's be honest here, an authoritarian democracy at best, right? Um, but within that, they're very effective, right? There are two arguments often made in the crypto conversation. The first argument is about centralization being the problem, right? Bitcoin introduces the idea of a trustless system. We move decentralized. That's the argument. The second argument that gets made more nowadays, you hear it in Brazil, you've heard it with David Marcus sitting in front of the US Congress talking about Libra, Facebook's driven project, right? About why Libra is so important. And who does he use as an example? Africa, right? And it's about being able to transfer money without cost. It's about not having to worry about, cross-border transaction fees and exchange rates. It's about not having to deal with corruption. When I send you $100, a corrupt part of the government is eating up 30, so you only get 70. This happens all the time. It happens with money wire transfers, and so Libra comes and solves that. Right, a digital currency is safer, privacy focused. We can do cross-border transactions for free. You don't have to worry about exchange rates. So guess what China said? China said, that thing you talk about, the first point of cryptocurrency, about centralization being bad? Yeah, that's probably true in America. You guys have a terrible government. We're awesome. Our people love us. Where we look after our people, where we're just the right kind of centralization there is. But you know what? That thing you said about, that whole transferring money and, banking the unbanked and, getting rid of corruption, you're so right. So guess what we're going to do? We're going to come up with a cryptocurrency that is essentially the Chinese, fiat currency as a digital currency. And that's what they did. You got China digital currency. How long before other countries wake up and say, we need to have, Brazil needs to have that, and the United States needs to have that? And so we are going to see a natural movement in that direction. The question is, who does it in 2 years, who does it in 5 years, and who takes 30, right? Because I don't know if you saw the announcement yesterday, we talked about it today in the salon. Kraken has a banking license now in the state of Wyoming, right? Um, 5 years ago, if I said, Gabriel, I'm going to come on your show and tell you that Kraken is going to have a banking license in America, you'd be like, I don't know what this guy is smoking.
That's fantastic. And I saw that. And another thing that really caught my attention in terms of public announcement was CB Insights buying block data, but not the buying block data, but the reason because they bought block data there. So I'll quote the part in the short article that they publicized, and I liked your quote on that. They said, in case of blockchain, we began observing a shift late last year and a market change in the tenor of client discussions over the last 8 months. And with these shifts happening, it became clear from conversations with financial institutions, governments, and enterprises that blockchain had gone from merely probable or possible to practical. So it is happening now, and that's something that 1 year ago, I would say that if you said that this year someone as data-driven as CB Insights would make that statement, I would definitely say you're tripping on something. Let us share that because it's way too good. So, so how do you feel that, and how is that reflecting on your activities and on SVBS?
Yeah, so Jonathan, who's the founder of Block Data, is a friend of mine. He's a young kid, and he's fantastic. He's so enthusiastic. I've spent a lot of time with him, advising him with his deck, and trying to bring aspects of what he's been doing in Silicon Valley Blockchain Society as well. And when he sent a message yesterday about the acquisition, I'm so excited because one, CB is a great company, right? He's in good hands. But also, it's such a testament to like the quote said, like you read, when things hit an inflection point, you just know, because not from just a sentiment perspective, look at the incremental news coming out just in the past 10 days, right? We've had the news about a single regulatory body instead of a statewide body within the United States. We've heard about Kraken getting a banking license, right? And these are kind of great macro level conversations. And the thing that you and your audience would have noticed as well, the conversations around crypto aren't limited to cool new startup only anymore. Those conversations always include JP Morgan. They always include bank A, B, C, or D. They always include large consulting company. They always include IBM. They always include, Ford Motor Company, or someone doing incredible stuff with their supply chain. Where, with the as I mentioned earlier, I sit on the board of the Norwegian Refugee Council. It's a brilliant refugee agency, touches the lives of about 10 million refugees a year in places of the highest conflict, right? One of the biggest challenges for refugees, besides safety and food, clothing, shelter, which of course these refugee agencies are designed, the camps are designed for, is identity. You escape with your life, you don't have identity, you don't have a passport, and even if you did, if you were a Syrian refugee, you don't recognize the Assad regime anymore, so I can't go and verify your passport, right? Classic problem with centralized identity. Now, as everyone who is familiar with the world of blockchain knows, decentralized identity solves that problem, because once verification at the point of issue is done, then it doesn't matter if that issuer doesn't exist anymore. So if you're the Norwegian Refugee Council and you shut down for whatever reason, the ID cards you have given these refugees mean nothing if you're not there to verify them. But on the blockchain, this can persist. And to me, this is really important, not only because it's, important, part of my life and, the work that I do, but when you start solving for the challenges of the most vulnerable that have no impact on our lives. A refugee in a camp outside of Syria doesn't impact your life or my life in any way. But when they are affected positively by the industry at large, by the idea of identity, the blockchain, by the idea of, I'm not sure if you're familiar, I champion a project called Rainfall, where we use advanced AI to create value from people's data. So you as an individual can give consent for your data to be used on a decentralized platform. So unlike Facebook or Amazon or Google, it doesn't get sucked into one engine and then they know everything about everyone. In a decentralized way, Rainfall creates value from everyone's data and then makes that value available as intelligence using a concept called differential privacy, which you're probably familiar with and many of your audience probably are, where it doesn't matter. I don't need to know that you're Gabriel anymore, or that I'm Amit, or Jane or Jill or Bob, that you can actually take the intelligence and monetize that and deliver it on a blockchain infrastructure back into the wallets using our currency called raindrops to these individuals, right? And the idea that cycling back to what I started with, which is my motto, my purpose as a human, is how do we make a positive impact on people's lives, right? And we can use technology to do that in a very, very sensible way. And this whole idea is, how do we create not a universal basic income, but a universal earned income, where that earning is not because you exist and, hey, we're going to give you taxpayer free money. This is because your data has value. In a privacy focused way, we can create that value. And so think about that. Rainfall for refugees is about making sure that these refugees now start earning an income. You want to build dignity, you want to build self-dependence. And when you start thinking about, these are the things that we're working on, these are the things that we're talking about, these are the things that the industry is talking about, then we're getting there. There's this beautiful quote I love by Carl Jung, who says, people don't have ideas. Ideas have people. And if you think about it, this idea of decentralization, this idea of empowering what we can because of the blockchain, because of the power of AI, because of the clever utilization of tokenization and the creation of currency, means that we have the people now for this idea. And I'm so excited about where we're at.
It's definitely world changing for us. You're talking about earned income and not a basic universal income per se. And one very interesting, promising thing about blockchain is how you can reshape property, and how the most valuable things that we have in an information economy are things that are really democratic. I mean, attention and data. So today, you're not paid by that. That's not property. But with a blockchain-enabled system, you can have that. And everyone has attention and data that they can sell and that they could profit from that. And in that, you would have a very different kind of market than the one that's very impactfully, the word in English is hard to get now, but in the documentary, The Social Dilemma, and I don't know if you saw that, and for us in the space, I mean, it's something that's brewing for a long time. We know that AI is also as good as the data you put in it. And if you're putting people through those bubbles, of course, you're generating a new kind of society. So it's the idea, as you said, shaping the society more than us shaping the idea. So in all the possibilities of blockchain, what application did you see that excites you the most?
So I would say, to me, I would split that into three parts. I think I love what's happening with the DeFi space, because you're creating this opportunity for yield to be made available to the average person, and that's, especially in the context of DeFi, that's so powerful. I'm excited about that. As you saw today in the panel, the Aave CEO in one of these great DeFi projects, they've done really well. So we really like what's happening in that space. Then I look at the verticalization, and I think what blockchain is doing for supply chains, what blockchain is doing for the idea of provenance, right? The provenance of something is to prove its path, to prove its history, to prove its legality. And you think about the provenance of art, or you think about the provenance of wine, or you think about the provenance of food supply, and that ability to create these, farm to table sustainable food supplies that are, properly tracked on the blockchain. You imagine the same thing for medicines, and other essential items. We could have certainly done with that in the US, and I'm sure in Brazil as well during this COVID crisis, for ventilators and masks and other personal protective equipment. The third part that I'm really excited by is this intersection of how we can solve for the example I gave you with the Norwegian Refugee Council. Solve for the challenges of the most vulnerable, and the most vulnerable are not just refugees, right? I think the better term is displaced people or people who live on the margins, right? And I mean, just look at what happened in the US, the richest country in the world. 45 million people jobless in the COVID crisis, right? It was 50 million. And the number of people who fell into the cracks that you wouldn't have imagined. People in San Francisco, the richest city in the world, right? Most expensive, all of these things. People weren't able to meet their groceries. They weren't able to, pay for essential services. And so the idea that whether it's the refugees, whether it's displaced people, whether it's, the what I call the next billion, right? South Asia, South and Central America, Africa. People who on one hand live right there on the margins and on the edges, but on the other hand are connected into a world that we are connected into. They have like these cheap smartphones running Android, right? In India, and I'm sure you can reflect on that with Brazil because such similar countries. 550 million people in India are already on Android smartphones. Another 350 million will come onto these devices within the next 5 years. Reliance Jio, which is this telco in India, makes data available a gig for I think $1. It's basically someone who doesn't have a roof over their head or lives in a hut or a favela, right? Will have a smartphone, will have access to data, right? So how do we take the advances in technology that we have access to, like the blockchain, to your question, and apply it to their lives, whether in the form of identity and making them banked, right, without the traditional bank, or the fourth, which is the example I gave you of the Rainfall project, which if anyone wants to read up on, it's just rainfall.one. It's up, all the efforts that are happening are up there. And the idea that we can bring income based on a raw material that we all generate, right? Let's move from the scarcity-based model of how much land do I own? What grows on top of it? What is found underneath it? That's the world we've known. It's finite, scarcity-based resources. But guess what is not finite? Guess what is growing all the time? Data. We're generating it all the time. And so the reality is that if we can find ways to help people create income streams from that, get away from the margins, have that universal earned income, then blockchain and cryptocurrencies have achieved their purpose, I would say, right? It's not just about how many Silicon Valley VC funds return 15 to 50x on their LP capital. Great, awesome. I wish you well. They're part of our network. I'm helping you do that. That's great. But what's really great is when these kind of things happen for the world at large. And that's what, makes me very excited and drives me to do this on a daily basis in whatever small way possible.
Great. So we have one question from our viewership. And it's, good evening, everyone. Can you talk a little bit about the types of companies that investors are looking for in the US today? I would shape this question more in terms of how do Brazilian entrepreneurs get funded by investors like you, and how do they access SVBS?
Yeah, that's a great question, Eduardo. Thank you. Here's what I would say. There used to be a time where the only way to get access to capital anywhere in the world was somehow make your way to Silicon Valley, become a local Silicon Valley company, and then hope that you can make enough connections to get access to investors, pitch to 100 before you get one to write you a check, and now, boom, the wheels start to turn. Or create a company locally in Brazil, get some traction, become well known, be a local category leader, and then come for real money to Silicon Valley. So I would say two things. The good news is that times have changed and times are changing. Silicon Valley is not the only place to get capital. And more importantly, Silicon Valley is not the only owner of innovation. Some of the best innovation is happening in Taipei and Rio and Sao Paulo and Mumbai and Berlin and of course Zug and Zurich. And so innovation is happening everywhere. And what we're trying to do more and more, the reason Silicon Valley Blockchain Society has chapters in different parts of the world, and we will come to the Americas for certain. We're excited about Brazil. It's about making sure that we have the right networks and the right people on the ground that share the philosophy. I know we should be talking about this in more detail, Gabriel. But the idea that we believe, and more Silicon Valley is starting to believe, that the best innovation will be global. Let's reap the rewards of your local ecosystems. Brazil is a big market. It's a great place to showcase what you've learned, because you have that, Eduardo has cultural knowledge of Brazil, and if he's building a company or has built a company, it's because he understands the problems of the Brazilian ecosystem. And so the idea for us, especially with SVBS, is global capital for global entrepreneurs. And so how do we can deploy capital from the US into Brazil. We can bring entrepreneurs from Brazil to capital in the US, vice versa too. So Brazilian investors can invest in a Zug startup that is part of Silicon Valley, because at the end of the day, you want the best opportunities regardless of where they are. To the second part specifically, that's great, but I want to talk to Silicon Valley Blockchain Society, or I want to get to Silicon Valley investors. In the past, your only way was to come to the Silicon Valley, start making connections, connect with local people, maybe like myself. Eduardo can send me a message now and say, "Hey, I was the guy who asked you a question, and now we're able to start talking." Or he can ask Gabriel to make an introduction to me, and I will obviously introduce you to whoever is appropriate. And then you make the case of why you're local in the network and Silicon Valley is the right target. But the good investors will always ask the question, why is my capital the right capital for Eduardo Faria's company, right? And that answer should be a good answer. It shouldn't be because it's capital. The answer should be because his company has now done A, B, C, and D in Brazil. It's time to expand. And guess what? VC Fund A, Andreessen Horowitz, beautiful, wonderful firm that everyone knows and loves, and friends of mine, can help you in rolling out in the US, big market, obviously per user, still the highest return. So great, come. Here's why you should come, right? Not because there's a tree in Silicon Valley and if I come and shake it, money will fall into my bank account. And so that's the way I would look at it and approach it. But certainly taking this broader worldview, we certainly do. So, if there's a great set of companies, Gabriel, that you want to introduce to us, we will always look and listen.
Come with purpose. Come with purpose, and come with a good idea, and you'll be heard. That's amazing. Well, we're getting to the end of this 1 hour webinar, and one thing we always enjoy hearing about from our guests is their sources of information. So if you could share with us one book or a couple of books that you really feel like sharing, and another source of information. Can be a podcast, can be a documentary, something other than a book.
So the book I'm going to suggest here is not one of those workbooks. It's not going to be one of those self-improvement books. It's not going to be how Ray Dalio suggests you can make money or how to be a great investor. These are all great books, fantastic. I would encourage everyone, if they haven't already, to read the Sapiens, and the story of Homo sapiens, right? Fantastic.
From
Um,
awesome book.
yeah, but the book that I would really recommend and say 30 seconds about is a book that was a New York Times bestseller about 5 years ago called Stealing Fire, about 4 years ago. And maybe you've already read it, Gabriel, but it's a book called Stealing Fire. And it's a book that was written by Philip Kotler and a friend of mine, who is just, he's an incredible guy. And what I loved about Stealing Fire is it's a very Silicon Valley concept as well, and it's important for everyone to kind of be in tune with. It's this idea of how we're always trying to find that next level, the altered state, right? What is it that the top folks in Google and the Navy SEALs and the optimized performers are using as tricks and tools to be able to always operate in that altered state, that state where we all have it sometimes. Unfortunately, it's fleeting. It's not as often. It can come from external substances. Your audience has probably all heard of this. Everyone is look at microdosing, right, as a model for altered states. But yoga and breath work and meditation and cardio and all of these different things that sometimes just, it doesn't happen all the time, but it leads us to that point where we're like, oh my gosh, I can see everything clearer now. This is what I need to do with my team A, and this is what I need to do with team, and that company I need to introduce to so and so. And oh my gosh, the solution to this regulatory problem, I know exactly what to do. Let's go through here and there. And that altered state combined with the people you're working with in flow state is such an incredible, powerful place to be. And Stealing Fire is an amazing book about how you can actually unlock that through different tools for yourself and for the people around you. And for whatever reason, a combination of that and Burning Man coming together at the same time really influenced the way that I see things and my approach to, my ability to go into an altered state, whenever I need to, or for the most part, whenever I need to, was really, really useful to me. So if people get a chance to read the book, do it. It's called Stealing Fire.
I put it on the comments. And another source of information other than a book?
Yeah, it was I love that it went into details around the tools that we can all tap into. It wasn't just this is what they do. It's like, here we can all tap into those things, and I found that really useful. So I highly recommend it.
Awesome. Stealing Fire is and the whole discussion is very Silicon Valley to me, in the sense that it's where East meets West, where capitalism in the modern form meets the hippies, and I think that's part of the cultural recipe that makes the Bay Area so attractive to creative people, and part of the
ironically, Gabriel, Jamie Wheel, who's a dear friend of mine, he's amazing. He's the co-author of the book, right? He's Austin based. He's not a Silicon Valley guy.
Oh.
Yeah. But I mean, he's just an incredible thinker in this whole science of mind and body optimization. Jamie is bar none.
Fantastic. Well, Amit, thank you so much for being here with us. It was a great conversation. Thanks for sharing all the experience. And if you want to have a final word to our viewers, please do.
Yeah, well, it's been my pleasure, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to chat with you and your audience. And yeah, if people have questions that they as they reflect on, they want to ask, feel free to take those questions and send them my way, and I'll, as time permits, try and make an effort to answer them, or, make suggestions of connections or links. Just some final thoughts. I would say we're such an inflection moment in history, and like I quoted Buckminster Fuller, we can really sit here and be the victims of our present and the victims of what will then be our future. And instead, it's just so important for us to be the architects of it. And if we're going to be the architects of the future, why be architects that are not thinking in the long term, not thinking from a, I always say, and I'll use these as my final words. I love the idea that we as humans can replace the pursuit of permanence, constantly thinking about the job for life, the house for life, the big savings, the wealth, all of those things, permanence. I love the idea of replacing or transitioning from the pursuit of permanence to the pursuit of purpose. And a life that is lived in the pursuit of purpose, whatever job, whatever location, whatever life of choice you have, whatever choice of life you have, if it's driven by purpose, that life is going to be incredibly more fulfilling, not just for you, but for the impact that you have on the people around you. And that's my earnest belief. I like to think that as much as I'm able, I try and live that way. And everything else, honestly, will fall into place if you already start thinking in those ways. So I'd love to leave you and your guests with that thought.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you, Amit. Thank you all for viewing us today. Obrigado, pessoal, por estar aqui com a gente. Curtam o vídeo, sigam o canal. Abraço a todos e boa noite. Good evening to everyone. I'm ending this broadcast.